What is up, guys? It's SS Modern Warfare here, Gamertag Banter Chicken, and welcome back to another video. So, a bit different this time. In this video I'm going to be building my own computer gaming system. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to document this. I'm just kind of documenting me building a system, I guess. So if that interests you, then by all means keep watching the video. But yeah, basically what we have here are all the components I'm going to be installing. We've got a Corsair, I think it's an 800D or an 850D case, an XFX R9290X overclocked edition or double dissipation edition. Then we've got the power supply, which is the Corsair CX750, and above that you have the processor, which is a Intel i5 3570K. The processor cooler, I've added a cooler onto it as well, so rather than the stock, so that I can overclock, I'm just using a thermal take cooler right there. And it only comes with one 90mm fan, so I have also gone ahead and bought another 90mm fan here for using on that. Then there is a Corsair Vengeance RAM, 8GB, two 4GB slots. I will probably upgrade to 16 in the near future as well. And for the motherboard, P8Z77-V ASUS motherboard. Now, these components are not all brand new. Basically what I have done is I got a new case and a new CPU cooler and a new graphics card. So obviously in order to install those, I have to take everything out of my old case, including taking the heatsink and the processor out so I can put the new cooler on. And so yeah, because I'm doing that, some of this stuff is from my old PC. So yeah, they're not all fresh components, but I am literally building a computer from scratch because every component is separate and has to all be taken out and put back together in the new case. So that's what's happening. For storage devices, I don't have the storage devices visible, but I'm using two 1TB Barracuda hard drives and a 120GB Kingston SSD for the operating system to be loaded on. And that is it, guys, so I'll just begin the build now. I'm sorry about the lighting, I'll tell you that right now. The lighting is not good in this room. I'm in my living room. I've never done a video in my living room before, but just because of the sheer size of everything, I need the living room table just to install all of this stuff on. I cannot make a video in my room, so the lighting is going to be terrible. It's quite good at the moment because I got the actual light on, but through the rest of the video it may be quite dark, so I do apologise for that. But like I say, it's not a tutorial, it's just a sort of documenting me building my PC. So let's move on and begin the installation. Okay guys, so first thing we're going to do is install the processor onto the motherboard. So in order to do that, we take our motherboard out of the box and place it on top of the box, so it's good and easy to work on. So take this lever up, you kind of push it in, pull it out, and then you can lift it right up and the whole thing will come off. Now the processor itself, right here, has got a little golden arrow, and that should correspond to the one on the motherboard. So you can't really see it. Let me try and zoom in a little bit. Maybe zoom in, going to about there, I guess. So if you can see that little arrow there that's pointing, so you match that up with the gold arrow that is on the processor. So it's that way around, and just place it in the slot like that. Close it over, take the lever, probably have to move this up a little. I don't know why this camera stand is so stiff, but take the lever, pull it in, let it clip round like that, so the processor is now secure. So that's our processor in there, it's nice and secure. So what we can do is put our heatsink on next. Now this is the default stock heatsink that comes with the processor. It's quite small, so really not suitable for overclocking. I mean, you can overclock the processor a little bit with that, but it's better to get a bigger, more advanced cooler like this one, which is ginormous. We've got 4 heat pipes coming off that, 1 fan attached there. I've also got another fan that I'm going to mount on the other side, so I'll install this heatsink instead of the stock heatsink that comes with the processor. Okay guys, so before we can put the heatsink on, we have to apply some thermal paste. So I'm going to be using Arctic Silver 5, which is a decent thermal compound. So I'm going to do the line method because less is more with thermal paste, and the P method would be fine, just a little dot in the middle, but this new heatsink has 4 heat pipes, so I'm going to do the line so that it will go to all 4 heat pipes. So take my coolant, just do this line down the middle, what to do, and that's it. Alright, so next I'm going to have to actually install our heatsink on. So we'll zoom out here a little bit and get this massive heatsink on top, which is pretty damn big. In fact, I wonder if I should put that in first. Fit it into the hole. Okay, that's our heatsink on now. If you look, it's nice and secure when you can lift it up and it's solid. So we've got that on. Because I'm using 2 fans, we need to use 2 fan headers to plug this in. So this is the default CPU fan header on the motherboard. For mine is right here. So I can just go ahead and plug that in. If it would let me to do that, please. There we are. And the next one I will just plug into a spare fan header on my motherboard. So let's take this one here for example. Here we are. So that's both fans plugged in. Our heatsink's on with the thermal paste. Should disperse the heat quite nicely. Okay, so next step I guess is to install a power supply into the machine. I'm going to install the power supply first, then the motherboard afterwards. So we'll get on with that right now. So yeah. Actually guys, while we're at it, we'll install the RAM next. Now we can do different things with this. We could install this later because if you notice the ATX power for the motherboard right here is right next to the RAM, so it may be hard to plug that power cable in once it's inside the PC, so I may have to take the RAM out again to get that plugged in and then put it back in afterwards, or maybe not, so I might just install the RAM right now. So here's our Corsair Vengeance RAM, DDR3, these are 4GB strips, so I've got 2 for 8GB and they're 1600 megahertz. So we'll go ahead and see if it installs. Sometimes these big blocky heatsinks can kind of get in the way of the RAM install, but it looks like we'll just cut it right there. So we've got RAM number 1 and RAM strip number 2. They're color coded, so if you've got 2 strips then put them in the same colored slots as each other. So put that down, you kind of just have to push down and it'll clip in, and it's pretty straightforward for RAM installation. So that's that. Okay, so the next thing we've got to do is install a power supply. On this case it is a bottom mounted power supply, so it mounts down here. There's actually a grill here where air can escape, so the fan is actually going to be pointing down towards that grill instead of up towards the case, towards the inside of the case, so the heat's going to be dispelled directly out the bottom of it, and it's on, because it sits on quite high stands, the air should be able to get out there quite easily. So this power supply has got a hell of a lot of cables. This Corsair CX750 ATX power supply, whenever you're buying PC components, especially when you're buying the case, the motherboard and the power supply, you need to make sure they're all the same form factor so that they'll fit nicely inside your case. And yeah, that seems to be fine. So it's sitting in there, and we've got holes mounted on the case. If I raise it up a little bit, we've got these little areas here where we can poke cables through. The idea is to try and get as much of the cables as possible on the other side of the motherboard. So basically we try and keep all the cables towards at the back of the motherboard that you're not going to see, because this case has a window mod, so we don't want all the cables all over the front of the motherboard, just make it look like a complete mess. So we're going to try and get all the cables poked through those holes and as much of the cables at the back as possible. Okay, so next, got to basically just turn this computer around. Heavy. Turn this around and screw in our screws for the power supply, and that'll have that in there nicely, and then we can poke all our cables through around to the back. Okay, so now we move to the back of the case, and we have to install our motherboard shield, or back plate, back shield, whatever it is you call it. So usually, some of them are different, but most of them likely they'll be the same as this. You just take it in from the back, or from inside the PC, and then just poke the corners through. Let's try this top one here. And we have to go around here a bit. Put that in. There we are. That's looks like it's in place there. Alright, so now that we have that in place, we can go ahead and attempt to install the motherboard. Alright guys, so now it is time to install the motherboard. So we'll place it in here. I need to match it up with the shield at the back. I've got a little built-in Wi-Fi thing that pokes through, and it should just sit on top fine. Now bear in mind there are little rivet things that go through the screws to mount the motherboard. It's not meant to be directly touching the case because that would ground it, so it's on these mounts, so you've got to make sure those are attached. Now luckily my case has already got mounts preset for the ATX motherboard, so the correct size, so I didn't have to actually manually add in the mounts, but you may have to do that on your case, so bear that in mind. But that is sitting in there nicely. So now it's a simple case of installing the screws. There are three screws down here, 3 screws in the middle, and 3 screws at the end. So I'll just secure those in place and I'll be back with you. Okay guys, so at the moment everything is hooked up. The motherboard has been screwed in. You want to make sure the screws are not too tight and not too loose. So just find a good spot in the middle and it'll be fine. I did have to take this fan off the side to fit the motherboard in. That can happen. But then just reattached it afterwards. And the power supply is well and truly in as well. And all the cables are going to the back, the other side, so that the front where the window is, it's not going to be too messy full of cables. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and install the hard drives. So I've got my Seagate Barracuda 1TB hard drive here. So take out one of the bays and the tray, and of course the hard drive is just going to sit in there around this way, the looks of things. So hook that up on this end as well, and this end. There we go. Right, so once we got it in our bay here, we can simply push it in and it'll clip in there. Now the difference between this one and normal, or sort of, I don't know, less expensive cases tend to have the hard drive bays the other way around, so the slots are facing out the way so you can attach your cables. This case is different. It actually has this side facing towards you, and the reason for that is so that, because there's good cable management at the back, it means we can plug it in from the back. So we can take our SATA power cables round and plug in the other side so that they're not in the way. And that's us got our hard drive bays installed. So I'm just going to flip the case over the other way around and we'll plug in the power and hook up our SATA data cables. Get that connected. Alright, move around to the back here. These are actually SSD holders which can be taken out. So I don't need the SSD holders down the bottom here. So I'm going to take those off so I've got access to the hard drive slots. I've got my SATA power cables from my power supply right here, so I can move this. In fact, oh god, this is another fan. There's a bunch of fan slots here. I don't think I've got enough fan slots on my motherboard to power all these fans. Plug that in and plug that in. So that's us got our hard drive power connected. And on the other hand, we've also got SATA data cables. So we've got to attach our SATA power to our hard drive, well, SATA data to our hard drives. We've got our power cables connected, so we just got to attach our SATA 6 gig connectors. So attach another one down here. And what we'll do with the other ends of these is we shall basically just push them through the sides here so that we can plug them into the motherboard on the other side. Okay, so on the subject of installing hard drives, we may as well install our SSD as well. Now, a lot of computers do not have SSD holders. Got a Kingston 120 gigabyte SSD. The reason it's got remnants, can't say that properly. Reasons it's got bits of duct tape on it is because my old computer did not have any hard drive, any SSD bays for this to go into, which a lot of computers don't have. So if you've got cable management, you can just plug them in and just try and sort of sit it in amongst the cables like that. Because it's a solid state drive, it's not mechanical, there's no moving parts, so it's not going to damage it. You can leave it hanging off a cable if you wanted to. What I did on my old PC was I put some duct tape and basically stuck it to the top of the case. But luckily this computer does have SSD bays. So we'll go ahead and try and install this SSD. Now I'm going to try and put it around this way so that the logo and everything 120 gigabyte is actually showing through the window. So that'll be quite cool if we can get that attached. Try to get that in, there we are. Plugs right in there. And that's our SSD mounted in there. And I've got, of course, I've still got some power cables threading through here that I might be able to hook up, or I could use these ones. Actually, what I'll do is I'll use this power cable here, and that should make it to plug in there. There we are. So we've got our cable connected. Now, because it's an SSD, I definitely want a 6 gigabyte SATA connection on this, so I'll go ahead and connect our SATA data cable on there as well. 6 gigabyte connector. And again, with the other end right here, I'm just going to thread that through the case so that it can plug in to the motherboard. Okay guys, as you can see, the cables are starting to look a bit messy now, but that's just I haven't got everything connected and quite sorted yet. So we threaded these SATA ports through. Now what we need to do is bear in mind what SATA connections on the board are 6 gigabyte SATA connectors and which ones are 3 gigabyte SATA connections. Obviously I want the higher 6 gigabytes for my SSD, so check with your motherboard manual. Mine says that these dark blue one and the grey ones are 6 gigabytes and the two lighter blue ones are the 3 gigabytes. So I'll connect my 6 gigabyte connector to one of these connections, and got another 6 gigabyte connector for one of my hard drives, so connect that up. And then the other hard drive, because I don't have another 6 gigabyte connector, is a 3 gigabyte connector. So that's my 2 hard drives and my SSD connected to the motherboard now and connected to the power supply. And that is that sorted. So what shall we do next is the question. In fact, let's just get on with the rest of the cables and plug them all in. So I've got 2 SATA connections sticking out here. These are for the DVD drive when I go to install that. But if we have a look, we've got our main ATX connector here. That needs to be powered directly. So with this pinned connector, so bend that pinned connector over, plug it in, make sure that's in firmly, which it is. So that's our ATX main power connector connected. So let's move over here. We've got, I can move the camera up a bit. So here we've got our 8-pin connector. So that's our 8-pin connector plugged in. Sometimes that'll be a 4-pin connector on other motherboards. That's an 8-pin connector for mine. And we've got our 24-pin ATX plugged in down there. So that's power to the motherboard fully installed, basically. Of course, we've got our SATA 6GB and 3GB connections that are connected too. So what else we need to attach on the motherboard is the fans. These side fans that are on the case are so on cheaper cases or cheaper fans, there'll be sometimes Molex connectors which run at a constant speed. These ones connect to 4-pin connectors on the motherboard. The reason for that is the motherboard can control the speed of the fans, so it can speed up and slow down depending on how hot the CPU is and GPU or whatever. Oh yeah, move down to these ports here. These on the motherboard are our USB connections. So obviously the USB connections at the back of the motherboard, they're integrated onto the board, so that's fine. But the ones that are attached to the front of the case need to be plugged into the motherboard. So we've got our little cable here, and if I just check with that how that's going to go in. In fact, this one's the audio connection, this is our USB connection. So I want to make sure it's going into one of the USB 3.0 connections. So again, look on your motherboard to find out which connections are the USB 3.0s if you have USB 3 and USB 2 connections on the front of your case. So that's our USB connector plugged in there. Alright, so we have our USB cable installed. Next is our audio for our headphone jack and stuff, I guess. So this is our audio connection, and not sure, it won't be very clear, but that is the connector there for the audio. So make sure I match that up right. I'll get that plugged in. There we are. Right, okay. Better check your motherboard for this because you can get them the wrong way round and they all plug into different points on this same slot here. So, alright guys, so everything is now hooked up, connected. I literally used every single fan header on the motherboard for all the different fans. Got our SSD bay in, everything's connected. So kind of last step is to put in the graphics. So the initial plan was to use 2 R7870s in Crossfire, which I was going to do, but unfortunately they weren't compatible. They were using different GPUs. I don't know how that's possible. They're both R7870s, but they weren't Crossfire compatible. So this is the R7870 from XFX, the one I had in my previous build, which is a very, very good graphics card. I love this graphics card. But in comparison to size, this feels small when you compare it to that. It's, I mean, if I lay one on top of the other, and you'll see what I'm talking about. If we scroll down here, if I put that on top, look at that thickness of a difference right there. This feels tiny, and this is a fairly big graphics card in comparison to this monster. Alright, so I'm going to take off the stickers and whatnot, and then we'll install this. The XFX logo is meant to light up as well. It's one hell of a nice looking graphics card as well. It looks a hell of a lot better than the reference cooler that's on this, because you can get an XFX for R9290X with the blooming reference cooler on it. And yeah, you got the XFX logo there, 6-pin and an 8-pin connector. It's a beast of a graphics card, it really is. Okay guys, one thing I forgot to mention is, oh no, they don't have it. Oh, they do. There is a tiny, you won't be able to see it, so, or maybe you can. Just in there's the switch to switch it from normal mode to Uber mode. So that's quite interesting. Right, so let's go ahead and install this. I'm putting it onto this blue slot here because that's my main PCI Express 3 port. I've already taken off the 2 back plates to allow this to fit in. It's a very long graphics card. You need a pretty big case to support a card like this. I think that's us in. Have a look. Yep, that is in place. I'm just going to lift up the PCI Express lock, which locks that graphics card in place, and 2 screws. We've got 2 thumb screws for securing it in place. Alright, now since we have gone ahead and prepared our case with our cable management. Now my cable management on this case, it's not the best, you know. I don't build PCs for a living. This is only like my second build ever, but basically we prepared the cable so that they would be right over the slot. So we've got an 8-pin and a 6-pin connector, and I've got these are both 6 pins, but they have these 2 extra add-ons that go kind of clip on, and then that plugs in as an 8-pin, I presume. So that will, does it go in this? No, it goes in that way. So plug that one in, and that will be our 8-pin connected, and then our 6-pin will come over here and plug in as well. Quite a tight squeeze, there we are. And that's our graphics card connected. Done. Alright, so I'll probably put the overall specs at the end of the video or something, and I may do a separate video on you know, using this PC to run a game in super high settings, and we'll see how well it performs, but that's that. Moving on. So here we are guys, the finished product. Finished build. We've got our 2 hard drives, we've got our SSD back there, we've got our 750 watt power supply, our XFX R9290X, ASUS P8Z77-V motherboard, 8 gigs of Corsair Vengeance RAM, DDR3, 1600 megahertz. We got our new cooler on there with 2 90mm fans, plus a CPU which is the Intel i5-3570K quad-core processor, and yeah, because it's on the same motherboard, it's still got my overclock settings to 4 GHz. Oh, and we also got our iHas 124B DVD drive in there as well. So let's turn it on and see what happens. Well, it posts, so there we go. So far, it's all looking good. Thought there might have been an error there with that red light on the SATA 6 gig ports, but it looks fine actually now. So we got our 90mm, another 90mm, we've got the other fan back there, we've got 2 fans at the front. Oh, take a look at that. Our XFX glowing white logo I mean, it's great and all, and I do like it, especially look good in the dark as well, but why do they have to mount it that way? Because it just faces down. I mean, if you've got a window on the case, then you would want it to be on the top here somewhere, the light. But oh well, it still looks pretty awesome. So that's it, guys. Thank you for watching the build. If there's enough time, which there probably won't be, then if there is, I will go and boot it up, because it's still got the operating system on that SSD. So we'll see how well that performs, and we'll see if everything boots into Windows okay. But if there's not enough time left in this video to do so, then that will be it. So thank you very much for watching. Go ahead, like, subscribe, comment if you have any questions, and I will see you guys in my next video.